Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Friday, January 24th. Position preview season is in full swing. Smash the like button if you're watching us on YouTube. Drop us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform that allows you to rate and review the podcast. Good reviews are appreciated. Bad reviews, maybe keep those to yourself if you have a bad review. Would be my advice. It'd make me happy. But yeah, part 3 of our outfield preview. You know, we have been talking about outfielders each of the last 2 episodes. We left off yesterday's show in tier 7, which is pretty meaningless to most folks. Basically, players at this point in the show are guys available after pick 200 overall. We use the NFBC's ADP from the last 14 days just to get a snapshot of where players go. And we pick up right where we left off yesterday. Now, tier 7 includes a bunch of guys that I mentioned: Jurickson, Profar, Jung-Ho Lee, Jake McCarthy, Jorge Soler, Alec Burleson, George Springer, Brendan Donovan, Jesús Sánchez, Byron Buxton, and TJ Friedl. It could be 2 or 3 tiers if you want to chop it up that way. That is absolutely fine. The first 3 guys in the group: Elliot Ramos, Cedric Mullins, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., covered at the very end of the episode just before this one. I think this worked out perfectly. Our decision to crack open tier 7 at the end of yesterday's episode means that we have breaking news that we can fold right in. Jurickson Profar was a free agent until we finished the recording yesterday. Now he's a member of the Atlanta Braves, gets a 3-year deal. Jurickson Profar, of the players I mentioned in this tier that we have not talked about already, hit more home runs than anybody else in the group last season. 24 homers. That is not something I expected to see when I put this group and the next tier all together on one leaderboard. Part of that was extreme durability. Jurickson Profar played 158 games for the Padres last year. It was 668 plate appearances. He also chipped into 10 steals. The counting stats were phenomenal. It was a season that I think even the most optimistic Jurickson Profar folks out there probably didn't see coming, right? It's a career high in homers in his age 31 campaign. Congrats to him on getting a 3-year deal, though, after the injuries he's been through, the arc that his career has taken, right? Like, there's
after a $1 million salary last year.
Yeah, and being a late signing. And just being a huge bargain for the Padres, like, it deserves every bit of a multi-year deal. Lands in a great lineup. I think the situation's good. There were situations for Jurickson Profar in free agency where the playing time would have been there, but the supporting cast was questionable because I didn't have a good feel for the types of teams that were going to be interested, especially on a multi-year deal. The fact that it was Atlanta kind of gives me a little up arrow. I'd be surprised if Profar didn't kind of nudge his way up at least to the top of the group that we started yesterday, and maybe even further. Maybe we see Jurickson Profar crack the middle part of the next tier over the course of the next few weeks. So the main thing people are going to look at is the power being at a career high level, the underlying numbers supporting it with a 7.2% barrel rate and a 44.2% hard hit rate. That's a huge jump. The barrel rate, it's like something we've seen before back in 2019. He had a 6.2%, a lot of like 4% and under over the course of his career. I feel like that hard hit jump is actually the bigger jump, the one that I'm more skeptical of. Like, do you think there was a tangible, repeatable change underneath, increased bat speed, some kind of new training, anything we can point to that explains how Profar hit the ball hard as often as he did and so much more than he had in the past last year?
Yeah, I can't tell. You know, one thing that we do know is that MaxDV is a bit of a proxy for bat speed. So even though we don't have bat speed going back, we can see that he improved his maximum exit velocity by 2 miles an hour, almost 2 miles an hour in 2024 over 2023. So I would be surprised if there wasn't, some sort of bat speed training in there. And then on top of that, I just think, when he was asked about it most often this past season, he tended to talk about approach at the plate. And I could see something, I've been talking about, skills, tools versus skills, and how these you kind of acquire skills over the course of your career. I think maybe he just knew when to take his chances this year. I bet you it's in the swing data in terms of what counts he was swinging in and hunting fastball. this was the best year of his career when it comes to the pitch type values on the fastball in particular. And even in 2019, when he was so good, he feasted on breaking balls more than fastballs. This was the first year he was a real great fastball hitter. So I wonder if he just figured something out. He also hit sliders really well. So there's something there where, he figured out how to hit fastballs and sliders, and that's what the league is right now. So one thing that I tend to look at that batted ball data and say, I'm not interested. He's not going to have that power. He's going to regress power-wise. But he's on a leaderboard that I didn't quite give him credit for till just now. This is the second half, but no splits. This is the swinging strike rate for the last year among outfielders. The lowest swinging striker. Of course, everyone knows who's first is Stephen Kwan. Then it's Sal Frelick, Mookie Betts, Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar, Alex Verdugo, Tyler Freeman, TJ Friedl, Jurickson, Profar, and Miguel Andujar. So 8 out of the 10, I think, are regulars that are a boon to their teams. They don't have a great collective WRC plus because power is still pretty important. But in this league, I think there's enough of a thirst for contact that could keep him on the field if the power wanes. You know what I mean? Switch hitter in an outfield situation where there's not really anybody going to take his job. It's more likely that Kelenic loses his job once Acuna's back. And switch hitter with contact is going to stay on the field enough to, get to his 12, 15 homers at worst. So, you can focus too much. It's a little bit like our conversation about how barrel rates can underrate people who make a lot of contact. Maybe he doesn't have the greatest barrel rate, but he's going to put a lot of lottery tickets into the field by making all that contact.
Yeah, and I think even if you want to take the projections and bring him down a little bit, being in a situation where Kelenic won't disappear completely unless he's moved off the roster via trade, I don't think you can really bank on a maximum PT repeat from Profar. I think that's the thing that I would be a little careful about. Some of the projections are kind of dinging him already. So maybe it's like 15 to 18 homers, but non-zero speed, a good OBP, an average that won't hurt you, enough boxes ticked at this point in your draft. You're doing fine if this is where you're taking Jurickson, Profar. Pretty nice balance of categorical contributions that he brings. Jung-Ho Lee is also right here in this group. And I think in some ways that's the type of hitter, at least, that I kind of expect Jung-Ho Lee to be. Lower strikeout rate in the brief time that we saw him with the Giants before injury ended his season after just 37 games, but an 8.2% strikeout rate, popped a couple of homers, stole a couple of bases. Maybe it's another sort of Stephen Kwan sort of profile, right? Lower strikeout rate, maybe a little less raw power than what we were just talking about from Profar. But I do think the way the Giants roster is built, health permitting, Lee is supposed to be a max volume player in that lineup. Yeah.
I think you don't want to get boxed in and have to jump Stephen Kwan a bunch if you have a low batting average, because I think you can probably get the same type of batting average from Jung-Ho Lee later. So if you are kind of like, I need to take an Arias, Kwan, Jung-Ho Lee type, you can kind of put the three on the board and take Lee later, I think, and still get what you need.
A lot of guys in this group, so we're going to try and move through them a little faster than we did yesterday. Jake McCarthy. Playing time distributions in the Arizona outfield are a little tricky to me. I think McCarthy got a lot more attention coming off of the 23 steal season in 2022. Did that kind of more in the second half, hit 283, popped 8 homers, and then took a step back in 2023. Kind of looked more like the same guy he was 2 years ago, though, in 2024. The player that I worry about is Alec Thomas, being kind of a similarly skilled guy that could just outright battle for those plate appearances. So do you have confidence that McCarthy has an upper hand and will actually at least play on the big side of platoon? Or do you see this as kind of a risky profile, if only because of the depth chart around him?
I mean, Thomas is projected to be an asset defensively and below average offensively, while Jake McCarthy is projected for the opposite, basically. So I don't know. I think that they would rather have Alec Thomas in center, is my guess. And that means that Jake McCarthy's more of a fourth outfielder, but he's behind a Luis Gurriel that we talked about. Is going to be taken out of the games for defensive purposes and rested against some tough righties. He's behind an Alec Thomas that, batting wise, you may want to put McCarthy in some days just to have an extra bat in the lineup. There's also some room at DH, I believe, unless Pavin Smith is going to play there a lot. What do you think is happening at DH?
That's where I think there's a lot. Yeah, there's a slight boost to both McCarthy and Thomas for now. But being that, I think we have limited confidence in Pavin Smith. Maybe if they like Smith plays a lot of first base, Naylor's the DH. That's possible. But it does seem like three players really competing for two spots. And as long as they don't bring in someone who mostly DHs or can only DH, I think it can work. I'm just not certain that they're done. That's the tricky part at this time with McCarthy. But if we, move the calendar up 2 months and we're a week away from opening day and the roster still looks like this, I might feel a lot better about taking Jake McCarthy in this range because the skills are real. I think it's a speed first profile, but if you're trying to make up ground and bags, I think there's enough here to actually use him for that purpose.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about the quantity more than the quality. So, yeah, I think the problem is that they're all lefties.
Right. Yeah. The big side platoon, they could share pretty easily with someone else on the roster. And then we talked about that with some of the guys in the previous tier, like the big side platoon guys. This is that kind of player, even though he's available a little bit later. And I think there's a little less track record to fall back on for a player like McCarthy and for Thomas too. I mean, I think McCarthy ahead of Thomas makes sense as far as what they've done so far as big league hitters. I don't think
if I'm looking for speed in this area, I might take Friedl over him. How do you feel about that?
I would take TJ Friedl over Jake McCarthy today because I think the way the Reds are built, TJ Friedel's role comes in with a greater number of plate appearances. I think you just get more playing time. Yeah. And I do think TJ Friedl being in Cincinnati gets a nice park boost in the power category that if he played somewhere else, almost anywhere else, I don't know if I would trust double-digit homers from TJ Friedl, but I'm at the point now where he's making that park work for him. I've seen enough of it to kind of believe in the low double digits pop that TJ Friedl brings to the table as well. So yeah, I think Friedel's a little undervalued relative to McCarthy, given some of these concerns. Maybe the best player of this group, at least from just a raw power perspective, is Jorge Soler. I mean, Jorge Soler, I like that they made the decision to get him quickly in Los Angeles. And they have the flexibility to just let him DH, not play him in the outfield. They can live their lives with Taylor Ward, Mike Trout, Joe Adell across the outfield, and Jorge Soler just being the everyday DH. There's always a possibility of Trout missing a little time. We talked about that a little earlier. Mickey Moniak's going to play maybe as more like a fourth outfielder type, but Jorge Soler could get 600 plate appearances. And when Jorge Soler gets 600 plate appearances, you're usually going to get high 20s home run power with the shot at a lot more. I mean, I think we just saw with the Marlins in 2023, 36 homers and 580 plate appearances. I think he still has that kind of raw power. Barrel rate at 12.3% last year was down just slightly from what he did in that 2023 season with the Marlins, but projections point to mid-20s power at the low end, and oops, he's got him up at 31 homers. I have really no disagreement with that. I do think it comes with the batting average risk you'd expect for a guy that can run strikeout rates closer to 30%, but I like that each of the last two seasons, Jorge Soler's kept the K rate under 25%. I think he's a little bit undervalued right here.
Yeah, he could be. I think the only real thing that I have on him asterisk-wise is I think he's probably like a C health grade. He seemingly he has seasons where he loses half the season to an injury, at least. And even last year, he was hampered and he was out of the lineup a little bit and also hampered by injuries. So I think that's probably the source of it's in the projections because he's only projected for 540 to 580 plate appearances, Soler is. So, I'm guessing that's not necessarily depth chart stuff. It's mostly, health stuff. So it's baked in. If you use the projections, you'll pay the right price. But that's the only asterisk I have is he seems to, and it's like soft tissue stuff. He has like hamstring issues and stuff like that.
Right. And I think the nature of the injuries makes it more of the C grade than the amount of time missed if we're looking at just the last 3 seasons. So that's where that slightly more harsh grade should come from. If you're looking at power and you're looking in this range, do you think Alec Burleson gets enough playing time to be a comparable alternative to Soler, right? If you're looking at one, you're probably looking at the other, and they're right next to each other in ADP right now.
I actually like the fact that Soler is a righty because I think Burleson is good and, kind of underrated for his combination of strikeout rate and pop. Some similarities to Profar, actually, even though they're not the same player.
Yeah, they standing side by side, don't look like they would do the exact same things, but it's okay.
But I would pick us. I think I'd take Soler over Burleson, at least in weekly leagues, because Burleson's just not gonna. He's gonna get the full big side platoon playing time. If you're in a daily league, I could see picking Burleson over Soler for sure. Daily lineups.
I just think my lingering questions about the Cardinals trying to make sure that they give every reasonable opportunity to a player like Nolan Gorman also kind of works into the equation of how Burleson could lose playing time. Gorman's also
he
a
just
lefty.
Doesn't have a glove, so
you're right. Like Burleson's a true DH. So if they have to begin the season with Nolan Arenado still on the roster, they don't have third base as a place to put somebody. It just creates that extra bit of playing time pressure. I think the underlying skills for Burleson are solid. Nice to see a really low K rate from him that's held up in the big leagues so far. He's up to almost 1,000 career plate appearances with 13.1% K rate to this point. So a solid player, but not necessarily a must-have or somebody that I really, really like just because they have a few other options that might
I guess I might
those plate
prefer
appearances.
Him to Profar in daily leagues because you get Profar and then you get the other days to put somebody else in, I guess. Like I think on a per plate appearance level, he might be better, but Profar will get more quantity.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. I think in a daily league, I still think I trust Profar to end up getting to the higher total and just being more reliable. It depends on the depth of my roster, I guess. If I got a lot of bench spots, maybe then I'd be flipping to Burleson in a shallow bench situation. He's not necessarily good enough with his time to justify the extra roster spot to mix and match, if that makes any sense at all. George Springer goes in this group. Is this good oatmeal or is this very dried up oatmeal that sat out on the counter too long and is not going to be fun to eat?
Listen, I'm feeling old enough already today. Jeez. You don't have to call me dried up oatmeal crusted to the side of the bowl.
I was talking about Springer, not you.
Yeah, I know, but it's.
Well, I guess if George Springer is dried out oatmeal at 35, then what does he know?
That's what I'm saying. There's probably again looking at his max EV a real reduction in his bat speed. And I'm surprised that his barrel rate doesn't reflect it yet. And I think it's possible that he does not bounce back power-wise the way projections say he will. And if he does not bounce back power-wise, you could end up with another sort of 220, 15-10 season.
I wondered about the average. The XBA last year was 244 when he hit 220, so that feels like it's coming back at least somewhat in the right direction. I don't know if I'm on the 220 fear quite as much as you might be. He's still doing a good job tempering whiffs, and despite his age, I mean, geez, he was a really efficient base stealer, 16 for 17 last year, so chooses his spots really well. I don't think there's much pressure on his playing time, so I'm kind of looking a little more towards like passable oatmeal for George Springer. I think this could work.
What happens if
for
they
one more year?
Sign Pete Alonso? I mean, we've got Santander, Varsho out there. Pete Alonso would play DH, I guess, and that would loose, I guess, David Schneider upon mostly outfield duty. Would you sit Springer for Schneider?
No, they're both right-handed. No,
Yeah.
zero worries. They can add Pete Alonso, and I don't think it has more than a very fringe effect on Springer's playing time. I think having another masher in the lineup helps George Springer's counting stats more than the trickle-down loss in playing time hurts him.
Yeah, that's I think that Springer's also a good lesson in, maybe if you add it all up, he won't be quote unquote worth his contract, but I think he's a decent kind of guide for the types of players to sign to long-term contracts. Is that they're five-tool, or at least they can contribute in so many different ways that as they get older, you never know which way is going to be the most valuable for them. Springer last year was most valuable as a base runner. If you're sort of adding up the different things he did. So, the fact that he was a decent defender, he's held on to that, and I think those things will keep him on the field, even if he puts up a below average batting line again.
Yeah, that's where I think the passable, good enough oatmeal vibes come from for me with Springer. I think, and if they do add one more bat, I do like that lineup quite a bit more with Pete Alonso in it on a regular basis.
And I was also noticing when I was like sort of looking through this tier that it's kind of a rough place to be looking for speed, because you have to either kind of Victor Robles or take that shot at Jake McCarthy's playing time, or TJ Friedl, who probably because of due to injury didn't steal as much last year. Like Springer actually steps forward as maybe somebody that you could at least get 10 steals from, to maybe 15 with non-zero power and probably full playing time. You know what I mean? Like in a tier where the other stolen base options maybe have more questions, he's actually kind of a guy you might take to get non-zero steals to kind of get a little bit extra in the steals category.
Yeah, just adding in the three guys that were part of the show yesterday that are also in this tier. Cedric Mullins is the leader in stolen bases a year ago from this group, 32 bags. McCarthy with his 25 was second.
So you've got issues. These outfielders all have issues. There's nobody that I circle and I'm like, I love this guy in this tier. I think maybe Jung-Hoo Lee, just because it's cheap batting average.
Right. I think
he'll play all the time.
I think this is a group that the ADP, the draft market, has kind of got correct. I don't think there's a lot being overlooked from a skills perspective. I think Lee would make sense just because we haven't seen a lot of him in the big leagues yet. Soler, I mentioned the power case for him, but like Brendan Donovan, some of the concerns I have about Alec Burleson also apply to Brendan Donovan. I know he can play all over, and that'll probably help him keep that plate appearance total up. But I don't know, is there anything that Brendan Donovan does that is good enough, especially in like a mid-sized mixed league? Last year was a good season. It was 15% better than league average. He had 278 with a 342 OBP, but it was 14 homers, 73 RBIs, 65 runs, 5 steals. It's a good season. It's just like, I don't know if there's anything more there. And then there's the possibility of playing less for the same concerns we have about Burleson.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the benchmarks you have for a 15-team league, he doesn't reach any of them except for batting average.
Yeah, so that's suboptimal.
I think of him probably a lot the way that his team does, and Willi Castro appears in this same tier. They're kind of, I would not like to take them here because I would rather take them as my first bench guy, as a guy that in a head-to-head situation, I could put in for extra ABs in two different positions or 3 different positions. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And, buying them here suggests that you think they are a starting outfielder, in which case I think you'd want to get closer to those benchmarks across the board. So if they fall, if you're in a 12 team, situation, I think Donovan and Castro, that's their best use. It's like a 12 team head to head where they're like your utility or your bench guy, and you're plugging them in for just extra stats on the days the other guys miss.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at them. But I do try to find that profile later because I think you can end up kind of picking out a glue guy that doesn't come with the extra price of having done it for a year or multiple years. And I think in the case of Donovan, there's just that track record. Hey, like this is a reliable, always finds his playing time sort of player. But those guys, they shouldn't cost you a top 250 pick. That's the way I look at them, at least in a lot of these leagues. A few other names in this tier, moving a little further down. Jesús, Sánchez, Byron, Buxton, and you mentioned TJ Friedl earlier. Sánchez, at least because of the team he's playing on with the Marlins, max playing time of the group potential. I mean, could just play every single day because who are they going to play instead, right? Just cobbling together a passable lineup some days is going to be a challenge, I think, the way the Marlins are built, the way they're going through their current teardown.
I'd be interested to see that baseball reference chart because my instinct was that he was being tell me where to get this so I don't have to make you do this for this work.
Okay, so this is important because baseball reference is great and it has so much stuff on it.
And I'm not very good at it.
It's very easy to go to baseball reference, find something and forget how you found it and then just get kind of distracted by all the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you go to the team page for whatever team you want. So you can just Google 2024 Marlins baseball reference or click on that once you're in there, however you want to get there. And then you go to the tab. It's the other tab. The more Marlins page, the more 2024 Marlins pages, and then the other section.
Batting orders.
That's the one. That's the. What'd you call me yesterday?
Fancy chart man.
Fancy chart man. This is how fancy chart man finds what he's looking for.
And if I toggle LHP, that tells me if he started or not.
If you choose from the drop down of players, the player you want to see, it'll highlight the games he started. I don't use the toggles because I like seeing the whole season and being able to scroll down. And you'll see he definitely sits against some lefties. He wasn't sitting against all lefties last year. It seemed like it kind of started as more of a strict platoon where he didn't start against a lefty until probably mid-June, and then once that happened,
it looks like he's an everyday guy by the end of the season.
Closer to an everyday guy, right? And it's some of that's
just dropped him in the batting order against lefties, I think.
Right, and if you're in their position, like, why not see if you can just get better with the opportunities? What's
we've talked about the rule of 5, and they don't have 5.
Nope, they do not have 5 everyday.
I think their everyday players are Xavier Edwards and Jesús Sánchez.
Leaves the door open for a few others to emerge and possibly be some late values at this position. And
others. For what it's worth, Sánchez swings the bat hard, and if he ever lifted the ball better, could have a mini power breakout. I'm not calling for it anymore at 27, with 1,500 plate appearances under his belt, but there's always the opportunity for what I'm hearing out of sort of player development camps is that the Marlins have changed their hitting process. And, I'm doing a story about the modern hitting, like developing the modern hitting prospect. And I did ask someone like, who's at the top of developing hitting right now? And they were, they said that, and this may surprise some people, but this is what people thought, that the Yankees were pretty good at developing bat speed, power, and swing decisions, and that the Red Sox were good, and that the Marlins were poaching a lot, that the Orioles were good, and that the Marlins were poaching a lot of people from those organizations. So maybe he gets some better hitting coaching in the next year or two and breaks out that way. But I also just like him because he does hit those benchmarks. He's going to hit 260 with 20 plus homers and 10 plus steals. Like he at least is an average fantasy player in 15 team leagues. And I think the quantity is being underrepresented in his projections right now, 539 for Jesus Sanchez in terms of plate appearances. So I actually have him circled as maybe one of my favorites in this tier. I have two more at the beginning of the next tier. But if you made me choose, two or three guys from this tier, would be probably Cedric Mullins, Jung Lee, and Jesus Sanchez.
Yeah, I think I'd be something like Jorge Soler, Jesus Sanchez, and then maybe one of, depending on my build, Profar or Lee, just to have a balanced player in there. Those are my favorites. But I think I'll have most of this group. I'll have more Soler and more Jesus Sanchez than anybody. Interesting too, running him through the auction calculator with the oopsie projections, even with a lower projected plate appearance total, Jesus Sanchez comes out as the 33rd best outfielder. It's like $12, and it's a little above Pete Crow Armstrong.
He's going as the 61st, yeah,
ahead of Elliot Ramos and Taylor Ward and Jake McCarthy. So I do think there's a really solid player here whose role on this rebuilding team looks pretty safe. I don't know if I love him for keeper and dynasty purposes, but hey, we're just looking at 2025 only here. It looks like value.
That's what how I temper it a little bit, because he's 27, and I'm not calling for a ton more ceiling. I mean, I know that he's prominent in our word cloud, so we should probably move on.
The curious case of Byron Buxton rolls on. Last year cut the K rate to 25.5%. Right, that was his lowest since 2021. Got to 388 plate appearances, his highest total since 2017. That is the sad part.
Still second highest total of his career.
Yeah, chipped in 7 bags, popped 18 homers, ran a double-digit barrel rate for the
I guess if you have a healthy
season.
IL in your league, he's actually probably an underrated player, because he gave you 280 with 18 homers and 7 stolen bases in half a season. So
right.
You got something else, from the other half of the season if you had an IL.
I think it's another iteration of the Mike Trout question from part 2 of the Outfield series, with even more extreme health downside. I think Byron Buxton's still a good hitter, a very good hitter. I think he just showed that to us again last year.
One thing that's difficult with Trout and Buxton, I'm just thinking of, is, I have an offer in my fantasy basketball league where they want to give me Joel Embiid for Michael Porter and Jordan Poole, who they're lesser players, and we have a pretty much unlimited IL. I could do that, but the problem is when you have players like this in a head-to-head environment, you just don't know what you're going to have when it counts. You know what I mean? So there's a little bit of that, in a redraft roto, situation, I could see using Buxton and just using up those stats, and then, having somebody else, fill in the gaps. But in a head-to-head league, you could start to depend on, getting those stats from Buxton, and then, oh, look, it's the playoffs and he's hurt. And maybe you can have one Buxton, but putting Buxton and Trout on the same build, I think, would be pushing it.
Right. Hopefully that's a relatively obvious, don't take on too much risk, especially at the same position too. You want 2 risky hitters by injury, one in the outfield, one somewhere else is probably the way to go, just based on what you're going to do with your bench and having some balance. But I do think this is not a level of injury risk you should feel compelled to subject yourself to. If you just don't want to deal with it, I understand. It's fine. I don't think it's going to burn you. I don't think the difference between winning your league and not winning your league is going to be choosing or not choosing Buxton at this price. If that is a way to calm the nerves here, it just looks like pretty good value if you haven't taken on much risk yet and want the possibility of 25 to 30 homers. If you do get the 120 game, 500 plus plate appearance season, I don't think it's impossible, even though it's pretty unlikely. I do have a correction on TJ Friedl real quick. I was surprised to see this. So for his career, TJ Friedl actually has only 4 more home runs at home than he does on the road. It's like a 22 out of 40 that he's hit in his career of come at Great American Ballpark. And that's because last season, of the 13 he hit, 9 were on the road. Very odd. better power splits on the road for 1 year. I don't know how sticky that is, especially when we're talking about a year that Friedl missed a lot of time due to injury. It ended up being 341 plate appearances.
Yeah, and I think the risk here is that the injury slows him and he doesn't actually steal the bags you need, and that the power doesn't look like it's really supported, by bad ball stats. So you could end up with a 250 12-12 season.
Yeah, it's in the range of outcomes, though. I do think 250, 12, and 20 bags is actually the place I'm expecting him to land. Puts a ton of balls in play. I do think the 556 plate appearances we saw in 2023 are probably a good indicator of where he's likely to go with the current shape of that roster and how he fits into that outfield mix in Cincinnati. So fine at the price for sure. And I think, as we said earlier, makes a little more sense than Jake McCarthy at this moment, but that they're pretty similar players in terms of what you're expecting them to offer you over the course of the season.
One reason that I don't love this tier, other than maybe, taking, I like your argument for Soler, and, I could take Sánchez, Soler, Lee. I could take those guys if they fall a little bit. Right now they're going in the low 200s, but, if it got to pick 240 and those guys are on the board 250, then I would feel good about taking them. I don't really see a lot that I need to jump here. But then one of the reasons I don't love this tier so much is that I love the beginning of the next tier. And I don't know, tiers are hard to do, and we just, we picked an arbitrary place, I guess. But, I'd rather, actually jump some of the guys in the next tier, other than maybe Sánchez and Soler, because I really like Nolan Jones. I really like Lars Nootbaar. In daily leagues, I really like Evan Carter and Matt Wallner. Matt Wallner hits the snot out of the ball. Evan Carter is a really good all-around player. And Lars Nootbaar has a lot of things. So those four in particular are guys that I have been getting shares of and that I like, and that would cause me to definitely miss out on the Burleson, Willi Castro, Brendan Donovan, even Lourdes Gurriel groupings that go 50 picks earlier.
Yeah, you mentioned Wallner. Of all the players that are in tier 7, tier 8 in the outfield, these last couple of episodes, these last couple of tiers, that is, 17.5% barrel rate, easily the highest of the group, right? Elliot Ramos is second. It completely tracks with the player that Matt Wallner is supposed to be. It's another platoon masher type, right? I mean, if you like Kerry Carpenter, I think you would also like Matt Wallner. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. And I honestly think he'll be so good that, and for cheap enough that, even the fact that he is probably a strict platoon, he'll probably produce value. I see a lot of similarities to Brent Rooker in terms of stats. This is their Brent Rooker that they kept. Yeah,
and some exposure to lefties from early July on, but did predominantly when he sat against lefties. I don't know if he even had a day off until the end of the year, and he may have been banged up by then. I don't think Matt Wallner ever really sits against righties, so just keep that in mind as far as how his playing time looks. It's mostly a platoon with a little bit of exposure. But good cheap power. Lars Nootbaar, I mean, man, talk about a top 5 word cloud player discussed on rates and barrels.
Does everything. I mean, he all the process stuff is so beautiful. 6% swinging strike rate, 113.5 max EV, 10% barrel rate, has a tiny chase rate, has speed. It's if only he could just lift the ball a little bit and stay healthy. That he could still have a breakout season. And I feel crazy because he's 27 now and it's been 4 years and he has, nearly 1,400 plate appearances. I still love him. I can't quit you.
I get it for all the reasons you pointed out, right? We love the way he doesn't strike out a lot. He draws walks. He shows speed. And the 3-year snapshot of playing time, I think Byron Buxton's kind of a good measuring stick for how injury prone other guys in this range are. Byron Buxton has collected 1,117 plate appearances since the start of 2022. Various injuries keeping him down, 279 games. Lars Nootbaar is at 1255.
It's not much better.
It's not much better. So whatever grade you give Buxton for health at this point in his career, DF, whatever, Nootbaar is like, what, a half grade, maybe one full grade above it?
Yeah.
So that's why he goes here. But I get it. I understand why you're still interested. I'm still interested too. I think I share your general feelings about this entire group, though. I mean, Nolan Jones, easily inside the top 100 by ADP last draft season, really just wasn't healthy at all last year and should get a chance to be an everyday guy in Colorado. You go back to 2023, he was on a 30 homer, 30 steal pace on a per game basis, even though it was just 424 plate appearances over 106 games because he was in AAA to start the year. Rockies. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a bet on the stuff that bothered him physically last year not being a problem anymore. And again, that comes back to how much injury risk do you have already? But I just feel like it was such a lost year for Nolan Jones. If you believed last year and were even considering the top 100 ADP, you should be all in on a possible bounce back with some health this year.
Yeah, I think he's not aggressive enough in the zone. And that seems like something you could coach or something that you might come upon yourself, because with a swing strike rate like he had last year, 9.4%, a 30.6% strikeout rate for Nolan Jones is very outsized. Now, yes, he's had this kind of strikeout rates in the minors and is probably near his true talent. But if he was a little bit more aggressive and had more like a 10% walk rate, could he get down to 28% Ks, 26% Ks? And if he did that, there's still a chance for a real breakout season. Because he had a 29.7% strikeout rate when he hit 297, thanks to Coors, and 20 homers in 424 plate appearances in 2023. So Nolan Jones, there's what he's projected to do, which is, hit 250 with 15 homers and 10 steals, which I think is light in the playing time category. And then there's even a case to be made that there could be another level for him where he really unlocks a little bit more contact and makes the most out of his excellent bat speed and barrel rates.
And I think the categorical offerings of Nolan Jones may end up being kind of similar to the next guy in the group. It's Garrett Mitchell. Mitchell's been slowed by injuries throughout his big league career and has shown power, has shown speed in parts of 3 seasons with the Brewers now. 365 plate appearances, 13 homers, 20 steals. It's 20 for 25 as a base stealer, so efficient. With a 264, 343, 463 line. That's a player we should be excited about. Now, what's the downside? Well, it's been a 34.2% strikeout rate. So he walks, but he strikes out a lot.
And also, is he limited playing time potentially? Like, were they strict platooning him?
Well, so this is the other complicating factor, I think.
Because he was in and out due to injury?
Right. He's been in and out so much due to injury that's one part of it. They've got so many outfielders that they really don't have to play him against lefties if they don't want to. And a lot of teams, I think Garrett Mitchell's defense would carry playing time against lefties. With the Brewers, they really just don't have to force it. Looking at the end of last year, again, because I think that's the better time frame.
He also, by the way, does not have that good swing strike rate. So he's a little bit more of a, I think, true talent, 30-plus guy.
Right. And I don't know if the quality of contact is going to be as
nice as Jones.
As off the charts. It's not bad. It's like probably a 10% barrel rate for true talent based on what we've seen right now, if we had to approximate it. There's a few things that are like confusing though. I mean, at the end of last year, Garrett Mitchell was hitting between 2nd and 4th on a regular basis for the Brewers. So lineup position was really good, but other than a final regular season series start against the lefty on the 28th of September, he had one start on August 12th, one on the 7th, one on the 4th. He plays a little bit against lefties, but he generally sits against them. That's just the way they've handled it because of the way that roster's built. It's not impossible for him to get those chances, but I don't think it's the most likely or the first thing that's going to happen.
Yeah. If had it, they're in a tier where you'd have to choose between them. So sure. I would choose Jones. I would choose Jones over Mitchell.
I think I only would because the playing time is better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If things change with the depth chart for the Brewers, then maybe I could reevaluate that. But that's been my lean too. Even though I think Garrett Mitchell does some pretty interesting things, maybe you could keep him in your back pocket as a fallback. You're waiting for Jones. Someone else also like Jones. Now you want something similar. It comes with a bit more playing time risk. I think that's the way I'd look at it. JJ Bleday.
We need that for Evan Carter. We need that 23 tasty drop.
Yeah,
he's turning 23 this year. He's
in
got
August
speed.
too. It's not going to be until late August.
Yeah. He's got speed. He's got an excellent eye at the plate. I do think he's probably going to be platooned.
It's a lot like Mitchell, actually, though. Like to this point in his young career, injuries have slowed him down, and we've seen a lot of swing and miss.
Mitchell, probably not as good batted ball quality from Carter.
Right, but kind of similar in terms of the risks, and maybe a little similar in terms of the categorical balance that you're going to get from them too. I mean, Evan Carter's projections for plate appearances, I think, are all under 500 with the sets over at Fangraphs right now. I think there's a pretty good chance Carter can get above that, even if he's losing some time against lefties.
And I would buy him in dynasty leagues. I think he's a buy. Because you're coming off a bad season. It's unclear what the role of injury is, and you're gonna be dealing with people who are looking at Fangraphs and seeing mediocre max EVs, poor barrel rate last year, and they may think, maybe he doesn't really have power. And I think with his age, what you can maybe bake in is just some filling out and some like we've said with like Churio, you can actually hit the ball harder. Like your max EV isn't like set in stone for the rest of your life. So like he could grow and add some power over time. And I just love the approach so much. And I do think the legs will be there. So, at worst, he's a guy who maybe hits, 15 homers every year and steals, 20, 25 bags. But if he added that power component, he could easily become sort of a 20-20 guy, maybe Pham-esque in terms of really high OBP, mid-length batting average. I think that if that sounds interesting to you, you should buy him in a dynasty if you can.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting at the beginning of 2024, Carter was hitting third when he played against righties most of the time. Occasionally, we drop down to clean up in fifth.
In the middle of the order, yeah.
And when they were playing him against lefties, he sat against some lefties. When he played against lefties, it'd be just bottom third of the order. So there's a chance that he can break through and just be an everyday guy or get the occasional day off against lefties. If they build in a dozen days off for Evan Carter and they're all against lefties, that's probably as close to an everyday role as you actually need for anybody going this late in a draft. So
then he'd be under projected at 460, 490 plate appearances.
Yeah, it's a little, to me, based on the way that roster's built, it's a little bit more like the Nolan Jones playing time outlook than the Mitchell one, at least as the way things sit right now. So Carter looks like a really nice value.
I don't know if I agree on that. I think it's a little bit more like the Mitchell situation because they have Leody Taveras.
Yeah, they've played that song enough times.
But he's just like an elite defender. So like you can just be like, we go defense against lefties and we put Taveras in,
I think Carter, because of the potential to be elite in OBP especially, I think he might be important enough with the bat where they'll find a way to keep him in the lineup. And Taveras, who else could Taveras get in the, like, what's the trickle down basically? What's the decision the Rangers have to make if they want to play Evan Carter against lefties? Jock Peterson being there as a DH. Okay, Jock Peterson's not going to start against lefties, right?
Oh, they could DH Carter against lefties, or they could DH Garcia against lefties. That's what they do.
Right, and put Carter in the corner and then use Leody in center. And so I think there's a path.
Now that we're saying that, that sounds actually kind of likely because Jock is a strict platoon.
Right. And then I think in the case of Garrett Mitchell, it's like, well, Blake Perkins is a phenomenal defender.
Right.
So it depends on these factors that are impossible to call right now.
You convinced me that the playing time situation for Carter is a little bit better. And I just love the skill set. This is the kind of player that speaks to me. This is the kind of player that I want to like take a shot on. It's very different than Nolan Jones, but the two of them do things that I want to bet on. When Nolan Jones hits the crap out of the ball, I will bet on that. Evan Carter has an elite plate approach. I will bet on that.
Yeah, Garrett Mitchell is a burner on a team that loves to run, and he has some pop to go with it. So there's the reason to still bet on that. But what I was going to say with the fallout on the Brewers depth chart is I don't know if you can look at what they have at the end of January and say, yep, that's their opening day roster. Because if there's a mystery team that could loop in on Bregman, maybe they're the mystery team. Or if they're a team that makes a trade because of some other crowded depth chart somewhere else, like, things could look different in a way where the idea of Sal Frelick playing third base again, which was a thing at the beginning of last season and could be a thing again this time, that could change, right? So if things stand as the way they are, I think I like Mitchell's playing time outlook more than if they add one more like kind of must-play guy that keeps the puzzle pieces shifted differently. It's just out of his control in the short term.
It's a little bit like our rule of 5, it's like he's probably, the 4th or 5th best hitter. So if they add a hitter ahead of him, he could drop out of that rule of 5 situation.
Right. I think he can be good enough to get into that group, but it could get crowded enough where he's not. He's right on that line. Joe Adell is fun. And I see him getting some hype, I think, in our Discord, actually, just because the power was there last year. Speed was there. Improvements to the K rate. Still really young, even though we've been talking about him forever. It was only a 280 OBP last year. So the real life value of what he was doing came out to a 90 WRC plus. Projections really like the quality of contact. And that's where you see that bump from Oopsie. Oopsie by far the most aggressive, 238, 303, 476. If you're buying that projection, you're buying 30 more points in batting average than we've seen from Adell last year. You're buying a 20 plus point jump in OBP and about a 70 point jump in slug. Are you as excited about Joe Adell as the Oopsie projection set is?
Maybe not on a rate level, but I think that they might all be low on playing time. I think that they have to play him. And there's a thing that's been happening across baseball that's kind of interesting, that's relevant for Joe Adell, which is that slugging percentage is more tied to team wins now than OBP. During Moneyball, there was like, this whole, oh my gosh, OBP is really tied to, team performance. And they ostensibly, acquired a bunch of players that were good in OBP. Now the league is figuring out that slugging is more tied to wins. And I think on this team, he's one of the premier sluggers on the Angels. He has to play. And despite the fact that they'll have, around a 300 on base percentage, that's not what he's in the lineup for. He's in the lineup to hit a homer. And so if you give him 600 plate appearances and you scale the less excited projections, you still get a pretty exciting player. You get a 30 homer, 20 steal guy. So this is one of the reasons you either keep your batting average high or you punt batting average. Joe Adell is available to you if you punt batting average. And I think increasingly that batting average is a nice one to punt. In this tier, you'll see if you're punting batting average, Buxton, Nolan Jones, Garrett Mitchell, Matt Wallner. See all these players open up to you if you punt batting average. All these players are more attractive to you than to other teams.
Or even if you're just willing to accept a little bit of risk, you don't have to give it up completely, but you could say, you know what, my target's going to be lower. I'm okay if I get 5 standings points in batting average. Maybe you're not going to finish dead last. So you take on a little bit of dead weight in that category, get a little lucky with a couple of guys. That can always happen too. I think that's part of the appeal of punting average is that if you're punting average with guys that make a lot of hard contact, sometimes they can have that year. Yeah, they just run a BABIP that's hot enough where they come out 30 or 40 points higher than batting average than they should, and you end up being just fine, and you got all the power boosts from everything clicking. That's the outcome that you're sort of hoping for, but you just have to plan for that to not happen, because if you don't, then you are actually punting average. Everything else has to be airtight if you're going to go that route. By projections for WRC plus, Mike Trout, not surprisingly, a 152, the best projection for the Angels. Soler at 124, Joe Adell at 116. This according to Oopsie. So they're third best hitter by WRC plus if you're into that projection set for what he's supposed to do. If that's the case, you're right. Then the playing time is light.
I think Rule of 5 would be a good T-shirt.
Rule of 5.
I like this. It's a good rule. He's in the Rule of 5.
So many of these things are just math and science, like generic math and science terms. Like it does really fit into the core. Yeah, absolutely, just crushes the vibe.
We do basic math. We are science.
We are math too sometimes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
JJ Bleday gets a note here too. He cut the K rate for the second straight season. Continues to walk. Makes enough hard contact to be dangerous, and played a ton. So
yeah, I wanted to not like him. I wanted to not like him because I don't think he's a center fielder.
But you always believed he was making the adjustments at the plate, right? Like you were pushing Bleday as a late
and now
guy.
That I'm looking at him, I'm like, he did everything he wanted to do, and I don't think that they care that he's not a great center fielder. They need bats, and they're going to play him. So I got no complaints about Bleday. I think, maybe he won't hit for a good batting average, which is a little bit weird, but he's kind of an extreme fly ball guy, so he's not going to have that great BABIP. And he can be prone to streaks at the plate because he is a scoopy guy. He's like it's going to be funny. He's not Schwarber, but like he has that same sort of scoopy swing where he has trouble at the top of the zone. And he can go in and out. If they're hitting the top of the zone really well and he's not doing much with it, he can kind of go in a slump. And, so he's a flawed player. But on this team, with the advances he made and with the projection he has, he's going to play. I think he's a max volume guy.
Fun fact for you, by the way, when you say scoopy, there are many people who grew up in Wisconsin or in the upper Midwest where Culver's footprint has grown over the years who thought of Culver's immediately because Scoopy is the name of their mascot. It's the cone full of custard with a face. He's great. Scoopy is the best.
I love it.
If we do a live show in Wisconsin, I really want Scoopy to make an appearance. I want Scoopy and Bernie Brewer.
We're live at the Culver's.
Hey, you know what? I'm going to work on that. I'm going to work on building up a friendship with a franchisee of a local Culver's that likes the show enough to let us build a little studio in the corner and do a live show in a Culver's. That would be amazing. How Wisconsin can we make a live show? That's a challenge. Charlie Barons comes out and opens. Get a little Pat McCurdy in there. Everybody listening to the show not from Wisconsin is like, what are you talking about, man? You're just making up names. You've lost it. Get a little fish fry going. Yeah. I got a good plan for that one. Michael Conforto goes in this group. Playing time capped just because of the team he's on, but quality of plate appearances and supporting cast maybe so good where he ends up being a good value this late.
I mean, his bad ball stats were the best of his career basically last year. And what did we notice about his splits? He had like 13 of 20 homers on the road, or 17. He had 17 of his homers on the road, I think.
Yeah, he only hit 3 in San Francisco in 58 games, but he had 17 in 72 games away from Oracle.
Yeah, so, he could be a guy who hits you 25 homers in 500 plate appearances. Little mini Jock Peterson.
A mini Jock Peterson. Well, projections spit him out as about a top 75 outfielder. That's again using Oopsie. 504 plate appearances. Kind of feels about right, given who he is and the team he's on.
It's not great for weekly leagues, I don't think.
Yeah, a little more fun.
It's a kind of a guy that if you have in a weekly leagues, you're going to be sitting some weeks. So the good news is he's a 5th outfielder by ADP. So you could have him as your 5th outfielder as long as when you have a good bench outfielder and you decide like, this year I'm going to be spending time where, Conforto sits Friday through Sunday, for some other guy when he faces lefties. And you could coax a little more value out of Conforto that way.
The other guy that's in this group that I think has a similar limitation on playing time goes right next to Conforto. It's Wilyer Abreu. The way the Red Sox are going to divvy up playing time with the impending arrivals of Christian Campbell and Roman Anthony is going to cause problems for probably two guys on the depth chart, because when I see Christian Campbell, I see a guy that's going to play every day. I see a righty who can play enough spots well, who should be an impact bat. He should get a large share of playing time, right? So that's my expectation for him. And Roman Anthony should be a special player in the outfield too. So you fold two more guys onto this depth chart. Easy to kind of cross off David Hamilton as a starter and say, hey, he's a backup. Fine, that's easy to do. But then who loses if both Anthony and Campbell are up early and taking everyday roles? To me, it's either Ceddanne Rafaela or Wilyer Abreu, or it kind of just, they both lose something because they have to share. They become a platoon instead of having chances to play every day.
This is a crowded roster. There's risk on every non-elite Boston player. And I honestly think it's a little bit early for Roman Anthony. He's 20 years old. I know he just had a 162 WRC plus in AAA though, so at some point he'll just knock the door right over. But I don't think he'll start the season as the center fielder, especially since they have Rafael under contract for a while, and they have a pretty good situation if they do Duran, Abreu, Yoshida, Rafaela to start the season. You'd feel pretty good about that. I do think that Christian Campbell has a better chance of breaking with the team, going north of the team. He's 22. He has a little bit less time at the high minors, but he also was great. And just because of the position, he's fighting Hamilton and Grissom, and I think he's got an easier road to playing time. This all is about Wilyer Abreu somehow, I know. But I think that with what he's done and what he's in terms of what he's projected to do, he should be an everyday player, because he's projected, at least by Oopsie, to be 15% better than league average, and a normal platoon split would have you at least around league average against lefties. You know what I'm saying? Like you would project him to be around league average against lefties if he was 15% better overall. So, and he's a decent defender. So, for me, he plays every day. For the Red Sox, maybe not.
If my eyes are not deceiving me, and they certainly could be at this point in the week, using my fancy chart, I see after June 22nd, there was a stint where Abreu was not playing. He was on the IL. After June 22nd, Wilyer Abreu made one start against a left-handed pitcher. So it was a pretty firm platoon arrangement for him last year. So the risk is pretty evident from that. Projections are all good. At least 8% better than league average. A little more swing and miss than I would like to see for a guy that has to hold on to the job, but hits the ball hard enough, I think, where you could say, yeah, we'll take that. I mean, he's a different type of player than I expected him to be. I think when he first got on my radar as a lower A Astros prospect, it was less swing and miss, maybe a little less power, maybe some speed, even though he wasn't efficient as a base stealer. I thought he'd lean more that way, and I think maybe just getting stronger and maturing is to just flip that profile.
Yeah, he's got a decent amount of lefties in his division, right? I mean, you got Rodon and Friedl on the Yankees. Who do you have on? Is there a lefty on the Blue Jays? No lefty?
That rotation should be all righties. Yep, that's all righties. Even the next guy up in Bloss is a righty.
And the Rays,
McClanahan. And then everybody else, unless they get down to like Ian Seymour and Joe Rock types, then they're all righties.
So 3 good righties in the division.
Orioles,
3 good lefties.
Mostly righties, unless Povich or Rogers are in the rotation.
I wonder how that rates against other divisions.
I do think it crossed my mind when we were talking about some of the guys on part 2 just looking at, how infrequently Jordan Alvarez sees a lefty, that's not necessarily schedule driven.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. Why I was like,
but he's surrounded by righties. And I think the context of your lineup is the other factor that I don't think enough about with how teams match up bullpen arms now, right? Ever since the rules changed a few years ago with 3-batter minimum, like there's a world before they made that change where Jordan Alvarez always gets the loogie. And because of that rule, now he doesn't see that many lefties, and he handles them fine anyway.
Right.
Anyway, I think digging into this on like a really micro level might actually have some value when we're trying to parse out which platoons are going to be more costly than others.
I also think the case that I just made for, making Michael Conforto your fifth outfielder and massaging him with a bench outfielder, I think that is a decent strategy, because what you're seeing here is the reason so many of these guys dropped to where they dropped is because of platoon risk. I mean, we're talking about it on every other player,
Yep.
And so, you can get good work out of, Wilyer Abreu for really, really cheap, and you just sit him some segments. Sometimes you sit him early in the week, sometimes you sit him late in the week, like when he hits the Yankees and he gets 2 lefties. And then he's in the Orioles are in town, he gets no lefties, and you're fine, and you love playing him. You know what I mean? So if you just take 2 guys out of this, like if you start to do a little bit of the player mashing machine. Like if you had a Wilyer Abreu and Matt Wallner as your 5 and 6 basically of your outfield, I think you'd probably like find a way to not really face lefties all year.
You might get lucky enough where the schedules are always favorable for one of them. You can kind of toggle them in and out, and you end up being more productive than expected from that last outfield spot.
That's how I feel. I think I would rather do that in most leagues than take a shot at Roman Anthony that I think is not necessarily going to work out. I don't think he's going to break camp for the team. The shallower your team is, the more the Roman Anthony one makes sense, because then you just take that shot. It doesn't work out, you drop him, and there's something interesting on your wire.
I think your reservations about Anthony to begin the season are fair, but I also think this is such a low price, nearing pick 300. You can take your shot here, see what happens in the first few weeks. Like if you're drafting early and it's even before spring training starts, totally fair price, because we've seen prospects.
He could kill it all spring, and Sadan looks like not great at the plate, and they're just like, hey, it's time to make this decision.
Or Trevor Story gets hurt, and the trickle down of how they move guys around. Maybe they have to play Rafael at short again in that scenario, and then they have a spot. There's stuff that can happen that nudges him onto the roster sooner than expected, and then even the wait might not be that long. Roman Anthony was really good at every minor league stop as he's moved through that Red Sox system. So
he's been working hard on his bat path. He's a guy that has an elite plate approach. Anthony does, hits the snot out of the ball and makes good contact. But he has risked a little bit more in the strikeout department in order to lift the ball more. And you can see that struggle in his ground ball rate, which at times has been really bad and other times has been pretty good. So I would actually kind of assume that when he first hits the major leagues, he has like a 55% ground ball rate and, decent enough power, because when he does hit the ball, he hits it hard. But I think there is a little bit of risk that he doesn't, become who he is from day one as well. So not only do you have a risk that he doesn't make it, but then there's the risk that this type of profile, a person who's made a swing change like this, like I don't think he's like, the adjustment period might be longer than one that we saw from like Churio. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. And I guess with the crowded nature of the depth chart and not having the extension Churio did, the path back to time at AAA might be viable. So you have to keep that in mind. Again, though, price is low enough, ceiling is high enough. Maybe the power's not there right away, but the stolen bases are. I'm in at this price on Roman Anthony. I think it makes sense. He can be your one prospect you're waiting on, the guy that you cut after a couple of fab periods if he's not up and getting that opportunity as soon as you want in more optimistic views. Last player we're going to cover today, and guess what? The late outfielders are going to get their own episode. Maybe we'll put them with the UT-only players. That probably makes some sense as far as grouping some guys together that haven't been discussed yet.
Because I do want to talk about how much I like Jordan Walker again.
Yeah, and he's the player we're going to talk about because he's the last one in this group.
Oh, Walker. All right. Nice.
You get the floor for Jordan Walker. The projections are nice, and last season was surprisingly heavy with time at AAA. And yet, when you look at this Cardinals team, the rule of five, if it's real, Wilson Contreras, Lars Nootbaar, Jordan Walker, Ivan Herrera, and Brendan Donovan by WRC Plus come out as their top 5 hitters right now. Now, the rule of 5.
He's also a righty, so it's like it's either going to happen or not. I don't think they're going to do small side platoon, you know, in the major leagues.
But the rule of 5 thing that I would point out is you can have a player that is definitely in the group of players that play the most that's not in the top 5 for projections. So counting off the top 5 projections does not define the group. You have to go through.
Well, because there's also a glove.
Glove matters. Mason Wynn's in their 5. Mason Wynn is one of their 5 most used players over the course of the season, right? He's a core guy on this roster.
And one thing I also noticed, especially this is relevant for the Cardinals, is you can when we do the build a bench and we talk about, oh, you have to have a backup center or backup shortstop, you can have players that are starters at other positions that are your backups at those, and that opens up more possible platoons and more bench spots. You know what I'm saying? Right. So like the Cardinals, I think the backup shortstop is Brendan Donovan. And
could be.
I think so.
I mean, yeah. I think they're just like Mason Wynn's going to play every day, so it doesn't matter.
We don't have a backup shortstop. That's what I'm saying.
They have one, but yes, like okay.
But I don't think they would need. They would feel like we don't need to roster like they did roster Brandon Crawford last year in that role. But I think once he left, I think Donovan is the backup shortstop, and I think Nootbaar can be the backup center fielder. So that opens up two kind of bench spots, and you can do more platooning with if you have that sort of situation. You know, I think it all changes if Arenado goes. Gorman is probably like the starter at third. Donovan's a starter at second. Sagasi makes the team, you know, if Arenado goes. But if Arenado doesn't go, I think it's either Sagasi or Victor Scott make the team because I think Ciani is on there. Anyway, Walker to me it's pooper get off the pot time. He's working with their new hitting coach to rediscover his 2024 swing, which I think would be great because his pre-2024 swing, because he used to make more contact. He used to make more of his batted balls. And the batted ball quality is excellent. And the swing strike rate is not that bad. I just think there's still a lot of upside here. And Oopsie, calling for 262 with 21 homers and 9 stolen bases. Maybe that's a little heavy on the stolen bases. He's kind of a thicker guy. I don't see him like stealing a bunch of bases, but it might be light on the playing time. 581 plate appearances. What happens when you kind of think probabilistically and you're a projection system and you're like, oh, it's a 10% chance of 700 plate appearances. And you know what I mean? Like you added all the percent chances up and you get 581 is like one way of thinking about it. But I think he's more like it's either 650 or 150.
That's a nasty spread though. So,
it really is.
That seems too extreme. I think it's 650 or like 350. Yeah. As far as being healthy, sure, if he's hurt, then the more realistic range is probably like 350 to 650. So that's why the projections might come out in the high 4s or low 5s.
I think the deeper your league is, the more risky he is. But this is a bench like 5th outfielder place he's going, so I'm cool with him here.
Yeah. No, I like him at the price too. Was surprised at how last year went for Jordan Walker, but he's still so young and hits the ball so hard. It makes sense to take that chance one more time. And I think of the team previews that we're going to get to in a few weeks, and figuring out how exactly the playing time is likely to go is one that I'm really looking forward to with the Cardinals in particular, because there could be some nice buying opportunities in this group with or without the Nolan Arenado trade. That's just the complicating factor right now if you're trying to forecast it a little bit early. Good news, you can join our Discord. You can participate in the Hive Mind rankings. Links for all the positions we've talked about so far are available there. There's a dedicated channel in the Discord for that, so be sure to jump in there, click on the links, drop in your position rankings. We'll combine those and share those with everybody once we get a nice collection. Thanks to everybody who's done that so far. You can find us on Bluesky. Eno is at enosaris.bsky.social. I am dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for trolling me and putting this episode together today. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.